Welcome to the Porsche Club Insider, your one stop for all things Porsche and PCA. Here's your host, Vu Gwyn, and the Insider crew.
Welcome, everyone. We're back at PCA's national office. Around the table, we have Manny Albin and Damon Lowney as usual. We have a special guest with us, but before I introduce him, I want to thank Pirelli for their sponsorship and thank all of you for listening. If you aren't currently a PCA member, you own a Porsche, grab that VIN and head over to PCA.org. It's the best investment you'll ever make for your Porsche. And for those of you that are looking for a Porsche, don't necessarily have one on the driveway or in the garage yet, we have the test drive program. Just head over to PCA.org and we'll get you all set up.
You know, my Macan has Pirellis.
Oh, yeah?
Thursday, I believe. It's an Inspec, too.
Of course it is.
It's going to guilt me that when I got to replace the tires, I'm going to have to stick with that Inspec and probably another set of Pirellis.
And I hear your wife is enjoying the performance of these Pirellis and the handling of the Macan and the exit ramp speeds.
Yes, if she had an S, we would have been in real big trouble.
You know what'll help with that? Some Trofeo RSs for that thing.
Oh, yeah.
Then you might beat me at the Parade Autocross in my Cayenne.
I'm spending Trofeo RS money, then it's going on the 911.
That's getting pretty serious.
Fair
Buying
enough,
RS to beat you.
in an SUV.
All right, well, let's introduce our special guest all the way from the Pacific Northwest. Members have asked us to try to kind of spread our wings. Naturally, because we are in Maryland, we have a lot of guests from this area. But today's guest joins us from the Pacific Northwest. Been a PCA member since, I think, 2009, has contributed to Porsche Panorama, a Porsche author, worked with folks with names you might recognize from Brian Redman, Vic Elford, Derek Bell, Hurley Haywood, Patrick Long, Manny Albin. I'll just throw it out. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to PCA Insider, Jay Gillotti.
Thanks for having me, guys. It's great to be here.
What brings you to Maryland?
Well, I'm from Connecticut originally, so I try to get back and visit my folks a couple times a year, and I thought it would be, pretty easy to swing through here and do the podcast with you guys so I can promote the book a little bit and let you guys know a little bit about what we're doing out in Seattle if you're interested in that.
I've known of the various things that you've done in the Pacific Northwest and helping the volunteer as a region, handling a lot of the technical seminars that go on out there. You have some powerhouses in the Pacific Northwest that are volunteers or were volunteers in PCA. You have Chris Powell, the great Alan Caldwell out there. I haven't been able to join you, but I've heard a lot of great things.
Yeah, we have a nucleus of really interesting folks. Obviously, Nathan Mers is, a treasure for PCA, and he's a member of our region. We also have a nucleus of book and magazine folks, because members in our region, we have Randy Wells, frequent contributor to the Panorama. Other side of the sound, we have Richard Barron, of course, whose gorgeous work is seen every month in Panorama. But we also have Ryan Snodgrass, who's written two fabulous Porsche books, and Jody Ellis, who's the design and layout person for Dalton Watson Fine Books. She's a Porsche Club member out there. So we have really good nucleus, and our celebrity events that we've done that you were referring to have been really successful and special for us.
Yeah, real who's who in the concentration of who's who.
Because of the rain? Is that why they have so much time to be put at a computer rating?
Yeah. I was just thinking, what brings everybody there? But I mean, the car culture there is also incredibly strong.
Yeah, we have some great car collections, and that's one of the things that makes our special events special. Is we do have access to some pretty special cars, in the Seattle and the Northwest area.
Yeah, I think a few years ago, your region had what might have been one of the coolest tech sessions ever with, I think it was the multicolored GT1.
Yeah.
The Roar GT1, which
right.
I wish I could have been there for that.
Well, that's really started it. So that was our first big special event that we put on. And I got to give credit to our tech chair, John Miller, who's tireless worker. He does all the hard work behind the scenes. I kind of get the glory being the moderator. We do the fireside chat format. But John really does the hard work of organizing and knocking on doors and never giving up. But so that was our first event. We had Andy Pilgrim, the driver. We had Tony Callis, the mechanic. We had Jochen Rohr, the owner. We had Randy Leffingwell join us also for that. But the special thing was, of course, having the car there.
Yeah.
And then we just went on from there. We, selfishly, in a way, I suggested for our second event that we have John Horseman come. He was the chief engineer for the Gulf racing team. And I knew I was going to probably do this book, my first book. And so I wanted to get to know John better. I already knew him, but we wanted to get to know him better. So he was our second guest, and Vic Elford was our third. And so thank goodness we started this when we did, because of course John and Vic are both gone now.
Yeah.
And so if we hadn't started when we did, we wouldn't have, those truly were once in a lifetime events, cannot be recreated.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the groundwork and what led you to the books. How did this all start? If you rewind, let's head back to your childhood and cars.
Very early childhood. I wasn't even 2 years old yet when my dad started working in a Volkswagen dealership. Eventually became Volkswagen and Audi in Danbury, Connecticut. And so I grew up from the time I was, before 2 until I was in college. My dad worked in the dealership, so I was always around the cars, and my dad's a car guy. And of course, in that period, Volkswagen and Porsche they've always had a close connection, but at that time, Volkswagen of America was the distributor for Porsche. So we had that connection. And that's kind of how I got interested. Plus, that Steve McQueen guy caused all the trouble. I remember seeing the movie the first time it was shown on television in the U.S. We can't quite pin down the date, but I think I was about 9 years old, and that obviously left a deep groove in my psyche.
Yeah.
Seeing it at an impressionable age.
You mean the movie Le Mans?
Yes.
Yeah.
For me, it was Herbie the Love Bug, but
Same.
basically the same thing.
Same.
And while we're confessing,
I love Herbie too. I remember seeing that when I was like 5 years old. And then I just carried on from there. When I got into high school, I really got interested in sports car and endurance racing. Started a small collection of the books, and then carried on from there. Probably in the early 90s, I had a realization, speaking of Nathan Mers, I had a realization long before I ever met Nathan that I was not going to be that guy, the guy who can remember everything about everything and, know everything about every model of Porsche. And so I thought, well, what's my favorite car? And so I picked the 917 as my favorite car. And I said, well, I'll just try to be, as knowledgeable as I can be on that one car.
Oh. What drove you to saying you have to pick one?
Well, I just thought I'm never going to be that guy who can really be the expert in every different kind of Porsche. The way Nathan is on the street car side of things, he has amazing recall.
He does.
There's people who know a lot but don't quite have the same level of recall that Nathan does. And I certainly don't have that level of recall. I often have to refer back to my own book.
Your own book. At least it's written down.
Let me see. What's the answer to that question? So anyway, I just thought it would be nice to focus on one particular car. And of course, with the 917, you have to, it kind of brings up all the what we call the plastic Porsches from, the 906 forward with tube frame plastic Porsches. You kind of have to learn all that history to understand the 917. But
I guess for viewers who may not be as well versed on older cars or older race cars, can you just give us a brief description? What is a 917? What did it? When did it happen? And what came before it? What came after?
Well, as I alluded to, I kind of start with the 906 because when Ferdinand Piëch became head of R&D for Porsche at about 1965, he said he wasn't terribly happy with the 904. The 904, which, by the way, our readers will be seeing a lot about in the April panorama. The 904 was a ladder frame with the fiberglass body bonded to the steel ladder frame. And I think Ferdinand Piëch felt it was a little too heavy and too hard to build, couldn't get the consistent build quality that he wanted. So he said, okay, we're going back to tube frame. like the earlier Porsche race cars, tubular steel space frame, but with a very lightweight plastic fiberglass body. So the 906 is really the first of the line, the way I look at it. First car really fully developed under PX leadership. Mm-hmm. From the 906, they just kept going forward, improving the cars, getting faster and faster. And eventually, 1969, there was a change in the rules where you only had to build 25 cars to homologate as a sports car, quote unquote, in the sports car class, and you could have an engine up to 5 liters. So Porsche built 4.5 liter to start, 12-cylinder air-cooled engine. Again, at that point now they were aluminum space frame with the ultra lightweight fiberglass plastic body, with the goal being to win Le Mans overall for the first time, which is something they hadn't done up to that point, and that was their ambition, which they achieved in 1970.
Great recall, in my opinion, right there.
Yeah. Well, that's my
yeah, that's your thing, though, right?
I eat, breathe, and sleep it pretty much every day. So,
So did you pick up all of these details through research in other books, or how did you gain this knowledge? Because you don't wake up just knowing 917s.
Well, I mentioned in the early 90s when I started to kind of focus on the 917, I just sort of started collecting every scrap of information. Could be a magazine article, could be a book. I mean, I think we're up to close to 25 books have been written about the 917, and I have most of them. So when I did my first book, I had a pretty good library to start with. Lots of magazine articles. Then when the internet became a thing, in the late 1990s, we started to pick up scraps of information through the internet, collected all that over the years. And then did some firsthand research as well for my first book, mainly with John Horstman, who I mentioned, because, he had been so involved in the program.
So why write a book?
I love to write. When I first joined the club in 2009, I immediately started writing for our newsletter, The Spiel, which we're very proud of. And I think I wrote about 50 articles for The Spiel, wow, historically focused articles, before I wrote, my first book. And so I've always enjoyed writing. I think I've always been a pretty decent writer. And I like bringing the stories to people, especially people who haven't heard the stories before. It's just really a fun thing for me. And the first book, I felt like maybe the English side of the 917 story hadn't been fully told. And I wanted to kind of organize and compile it all into one book. And I thought people might enjoy it. And, everybody loves the blue and the orange.
Absolutely.
That's something that, was always in the back of my mind.
I always think that whole story would rival Ford versus Ferrari if they did a movie, because you have the factory entry, the Golf,
mm-hmm,
and then you have Mr. Piech, who shows up with the Salzburg, his mother's car, to competing, essentially another factory entry. That is insane.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we could talk all day about it, but I mean, and a lot of it is speculation. We don't know for sure how Ferdinand Piech felt about this. It's actually an early version of outsourcing, where Porsche said, we're going to outsource to JW Automotive Engineering, John Wyer's company, sponsored by Gulf, to run the official factory racing effort, which they'd never done, and few people had ever done that before. So it worked out pretty well, but the suspicion has always been that Ferdinand Piech was not 100% happy with that decision. And I still think there's a sensitivity around it, even 55 years later. So it's interesting, but people are interested in the cars. And I also wanted to do chassis by chassis history of the 14 cars that Porsche loaned to JW Automotive Engineering, plus the 2 Le Mans movie cars.
In your research for the first book, were you going to the museum, or were there archivists that you reached out to?
I reached out to, first let me say that the archive, Porsche AG, was very helpful in terms of providing photographs. We could not do these books without the support we get from Porsche's archive. We could do the books, but they wouldn't be any good, or the cost of the book would be prohibitively expensive. So being able to access the photographs and some of the documents from the archive is just invaluable.
And that's a very small amount of people they have working there.
Oh,
You
yeah.
know, you've been there.
Absolutely.
It's not like they've got this army of people that are busily working with these files and putting it away. It's like I could probably count them on the hand.
Right.
Yeah.
And I'm
It's
sure
a
they
small
receive
team.
thousands of requests a month, but they have, like you said, a handful of people to do this. And each time you're researching information, not only do you have to have the labor to have someone research it, but it has to be reported correctly and confirmed. And so
Yeah.
it's very good that you were able to get access, because I'm sure they would love to do it for everybody, but they have to,
Yeah.
mark a line somewhere.
It's a little more systematic now for my second book than it was for the first, but I'll say that I work very hard to make it easy for the team there. So because I'm sensitive to how many requests they get. So I try to be very descriptive and let them know exactly what I'm looking for. I don't want them wasting time not understanding what I'm looking for. Because both books were done remotely. I haven't been to the archive in person yet. So both of these books were done, remotely, working over email, and had one video conference for the second book. But the first book was done literally all over email. But remember too, I was doing more the English side of the story,
Right.
not
Okay.
as much the Porsche side of the story. So that changed what I needed.
But that meant I guess you did research at, is there a John Wire archive you go to?
No, not per se, but John Horseman had all of his archives.
Okay.
Okay.
So Halloween of 2017, I'll never forget, because I was in Tucson, Arizona at John Horseman's house, and we got to not only look at his race data sheets and all his other documents, but we actually scanned them, and a lot of them are in the book. And of course, I passed those along also to Porsche's archive because they didn't have them.
That was
They
my
didn't-
next question. Where did
Yeah.
they go?
Yeah.
No, John's documents, Porsche had never asked for them, and he would have given them, but he was never asked to provide his information back to Porsche. So that was really fun to be able to look at those race data sheets and scan them, and now they're available, to everybody. Those documents will eventually end up in the British Racing Drivers Club archive. That's where they're in the process of going.
Anything you can recall fairly quickly as to you learned that you had no idea as you're going through the assembly of the book?
On the 917, on the Gulf 917 book, I learned a lot more about the chassis history. I was better than I thought I was going to be at networking within the U.S. community, within the sort of plastic Porsche community, the guys who have owned these cars, traded them, restored them. There's a community of these guys, again, several of whom have passed away since I did the book. But these are people who are really hands-on with the cars, and I learned a lot, from them. And also the drivers, because I was fortunate enough to, I've been acquainted with Brian Redmond since 1985. I met him my one visit to Le Mans. I was 21 years old in 1985, and, met Brian and have been able to keep in touch with him over the years. So Brian and Derek Bell particularly were really helpful sources also.
The Gulf livery. Everybody can recognize the Gulf livery. It's important to the 917, but tell us a little bit about for them back in the day what it meant to
Yeah.
the race team and the development, and
It's an interesting story because I hate the word iconic
but it is
because the word is so overused.
but it's true.
But I said in my preface, I think it applies to the blue and the
absolutely.
orange. And really, it was an accident pretty much. The first two races, they raced Grady Davis's GT40. The first two races, Daytona and Sebring in '67. And that car is the car that's in the Revs, in the Collier collection at Revs. And it's kind of a diamond blue, dark blue metallic with the orange. And they just felt it was kind of dull looking, didn't look good in black and white photos, which was hugely important back then because nearly all the magazine photos were black and white back then. So they went looking for another option, and Gulf had purchased this company called Wilshire Oil in California. used the light blue and the orange, and they said, "Oh, well, let's try it."
Oh, wow. Didn't know that.
California
See that?
company that had the colors, huh?
Yeah,
Interesting.
Originally.
yeah.
Wow.
And
Just
that's
learned something.
Yeah.
I had no idea.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so they tried it, and so Monza '67 was the first race for the GT40 or for the Mirage, sorry, Gulf Mirage cars based on the GT40, with the blue and the orange, and they just liked it. It just looked good, and of course they didn't know there's color science behind that color combination. The colors are and there's modern art pieces that were done in the '60s using these almost exact colors to create this kind of shimmering effect, because the colors are opposite each other on the color wheel. And so when you put them next to each other, it creates this, they're called equiluminant. They have equal light values. And so the artists, that's what the artists or the graphic designers technical term is, equiluminant. And so you put them together and it creates kind of a shimmering effect. It's really interesting. But of course,
May you repeat what you just said?
Echoluminance?
I see two colors.
Equiluminant?
equiluminant is the
Equiluminant.
yeah.
Echoluminant.
Now, of course, the guys didn't know any of this at the time. They just thought it looked good, which it does.
And it's probably easier to photograph than having like a purely white or purely black car or something with a combination, if they have the both light value.
Yeah.
least
I
I would
mean,
think.
in color photos, but again, in black and white photos, they look great as well, because you get just enough contrast there with the light blue and the orange that even in black and white photos, the cars
Easy
look
to expose the whole
fantastic,
car.
and the rest is history, as they say. You go to a Porsche event like Rennsport now, and every third person has the logo or is wearing the colors, or
Or paid a lot of money for PTS all blue.
yeah. But again, Steve McQueen has to get a lot of the credit, because the thought experiment is, if they hadn't made the movie when they did with the Gulf cars, would we even be having this conversation about Gulf and the colors and all that?
Can you share how that happened in terms of getting selected and with regards to the movie? Because I think a lot of people will be.
Well, it's, again, kind of an accident of history, because Steve wanted to make a racing movie. He was planning to make one in the mid-'60s that didn't work out. And so he was wanting to make one for several years, and it was just kind of a coincidence that when his schedule opened up to make this racing film, just happened to be 1970, right in the heart of the 917 period, with the Gulf cars. And of course, it made sense that he would portray a driver in the Gulf team. And I think he had become pretty good friends with Joe Siffert, and kind of wanted to portray a little bit the way Joe was. And so that's why we have this great preservation in that film of the Gulf era and the Gulf colors and all that.
Didn't he want to race at Le Mans that year, but the studios wouldn't let him because it was too much of a...
Yeah, so...
Because he had raced Sebring earlier with a broken leg, I think, right?
Broken
Or
foot,
foot,
yeah.
yeah.
Broken foot. Yeah, that one little coup I got in my first book is I was actually able to get to Jackie Stewart through Derek Bell's assistant, because Jackie Stewart... the legend was that Steve would have driven with Jackie Stewart at Le Mans in 1970. And I was always kind of like, wow, is that really true? Well, I was able to actually verify that, from Jackie directly by email, that not only was there a contract, but Jackie got paid, even though he wasn't able to race, because Steve was prevented actually being in the race because of this. The custom in Hollywood is they have this, I think, what's called completion insurance. So when you're making a movie, you buy completion insurance. So if some disaster happens, you don't lose all your investment in the movie.
Oh.
The completion insurance basically was the reason that Steve was prevented from racing, because they said, well, if something happens to him in the race, we, the insurance company, are going to have to pay off. And we, the insurance company, don't want to do that.
Yeah.
So he was prevented from actually racing in the race itself for that reason.
You mentioned a number of quote unquote happy accidents that have led to sort of the legend.
Yeah.
You were on the cruise with us as well. One of the famous photos where he's with the Tag Heuer Monaco watch.
Yeah.
That was a happy accident. That wasn't supposed to be that watch, and the Monaco wasn't selling well, actually.
Yeah.
And
I think that's why they got the Monaco.
And they sent it and let's give it a try. And because of the movie, because he happened to wear it and did that pose, now the Monaco's iconic.
Early product placement.
And technically that's correct because Don Nunley was the prop man on the film. And so Don wrote a book about the film, which is also published by my publisher, Dalton Watson, although it's long since sold out. And Don passed away a few years ago. But Don is one of the people in Hollywood who, during the 70s, formalized the product placement concept as a business. He actually went into that as a business, as the go-between between companies and producers in Hollywood wanting to get their products placed. But it kind of started with the Le Mans movie. That was before it was a formal thing. But I think a little bell may have gone off in Don's head at a certain point. Maybe there's a business here.
It's funny that happened in 1970, and I didn't really notice product placements in the sense that they stuck out like a sore thumb until maybe the late 2000s.
Yeah.
Way ahead of its time. I'm sure there was more. You look at old movies and you'll see a Coca-Cola sign in the background.
Tobacco was a big thing.
Oh, sure. You look at your James Bond films from the 1970s, and they're pretty prominent.
Really?
Oh,
I have to go back and watch those.
Oh, yeah.
I was never thinking
They're
about
there.
that. Yeah.
Advertising.
Subliminal.
Wouldn't you want to smoke the same kind of cigarette James Bond does?
Of course.
Yeah, why not?
Of course.
Not even a
anymore,
smoker,
but
and I want to smoke.
Tobacco companies are, they were the best at advertising.
Yeah, absolutely.
So when was it that you met your hero? When was the first time you saw the 917 in the flesh?
Oh, that's an interesting question. It was 1998. So
98,
Monterey Historics, Porsche was the featured mark because that was Porsche's 50th, right?
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah, that was the first time I actually saw one in person, which is crazy because I'd been following the cars for all these years and had never seen one in person. And like everybody, my first impression was how small it is.
Yeah.
Because in the pictures, and you always imagine it's this big car, and John Wyer even referred to it as a big car. I think he was referring to the size of the engine, which is huge.
Yeah.
But the car itself is pretty small.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's I wanted to talk about, we were talking about the car, the movie. More recently it's been the Gulf livery and the 917 always seems to be in the spotlight. Like it never truly goes away. It kind of has this cycle, but more recently it's been in big time spotlight because it was at Mecum.
Yes. So full disclosure, the Mecum guys asked me to help a little behind the scenes with the preparation for the auction, the catalog information on the car. They also asked me to be there at the auction. I did a couple presentations on the entertainment and the PR, public relations side of things. Did a presentation actually with Brian Redman and Chase McQueen, Steve's grandson. That was kind of fun to meet Chase, and he and his sister are kind of in charge of the family business now. So that was really fun. And the auction itself was, now a couple of weeks ago we found out direct from Jerry on Spike's podcast that the car sold. We didn't know at the end of the auction what had really happened. Now we know the car sold, but we don't know who's, as of today, we don't know who bought it. We don't know how much they paid. Maybe we'll find out someday.
But it wasn't sold at 25 million, right? That's when
that was the final bid.
We don't know for sure.
Yeah.
Technically,
we don't know. I will say that a few of my insiders that I talked to thought that 25 was a very fair offer. So I'll leave it there.
You've been following this car for decades.
Yeah.
Do you remember pricing when you kind of first followed these cars?
No, because pricing when I first started following them wasn't really public. It wasn't until actually when Jerry's car sold at auction in 2000, Richard Atwood sold it for a little over $1 million. I think that might have been the first time that we started to become aware of just how valuable these cars were and how valuable they might get, in the future. But yeah, pricing with the 917s is tough because mostly they're sold privately, so we don't know what they actually.
And racing pedigree, condition. Were 917s part of the I think all race cars back in the day when they were wrecked or when they were fixed, there's multiple places where parts can go, and cars could have been built from spare parts. So,
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
I'm guessing that's the same with the
There's
917
several 917s where the only thing original is the chassis number.
chassis number.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's something that we deal with a lot in the 917 world is
Yeah.
recreations. And being able to trace the chassis history is difficult sometimes. In the Gulf team, we had chassis number swapping, which I address in my book.
Yeah.
There's reasons for that. But Jerry's car, the chassis 22 is great because it has a fantastic provenance. I mean, literally every minute of its life, pretty much we know where that car was. And so it's almost unquestionable provenance. We know it was, of course, it was never raced by the Gulf team, but it was used in the filming of the movie. So it's racing, but it does have racing pedigree. Reinhold Yost raced it in 1971. So it's maybe not it's certainly not at the top of racing pedigree, but being the Steve McQueen, the car that Steve's production company owned and that he drove in filming the movie makes it one of one.
Right. So you have the racing side and you have the Hollywood side.
Cultural pedigree, right?
Yeah, cultural.
It was
Yeah.
interesting when the SJ about the first time we saw a 917, and I'm in my head, I'm thinking, when was the first time I saw a 917? And also the question about the value of the 917. So I went back in my head and I thought, there was a time when vintage racing came on the scene. And up until then, these cars just languished either in collections or just in garages because you couldn't use them for anything. But when vintage racing came on the scene, it suddenly gave a avenue for these cars to be able to race
Come back
in
to
and
life.
come back to life. Exactly. And the first one I saw, it occurred to me, was at the Jefferson 500, which was a race at Summit Point that Brian Redman organized.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
And Brian Redman was driving a 917. So
At Summit?
at Summit Point,
Really?
better than that, he was giving rides at lunchtime, charity rides. So people would line up for $5, and all the racers, it was just a draw of the straw.
Really?
Like a straw what car you would get in, but you would just line up with $5, hand it to the person for charity, hop in the car, no seatbelts, nothing. Sometimes not even a seat. You just hung on, and you went for a quote unquote parade lap around Summit Point.
So you know what I'm thinking about?
That's
Did insurance know?
Anyways, that's the first time I got to hear and see
Oh, it's so cool.
a 917. But it also, I think, escalated the value on these cars because suddenly people wanted to try this out.
Yeah.
People with wealth and were looking for these cars, and suddenly I think they really got into the forefront that these old race cars, not only just the 917, but the 910s, the 907s. I remember at my first club race in the practice session sharing Sebring with 910s. Two 910s.
Sure.
I think it was Mr. Payne and his son. It just blew my mind that I'm like, there's a 910 on the racetrack with me. It was really weird to be able to have a car that many decades behind mine still racing.
Thank God for the guys in the 70s here in the U.S., mainly Vashek Polak, and on the East Coast, Jerry Sutterfield. These are the two guys who, to me, they were thinking ahead that, hey, these cars might be valuable someday. And Vashek particularly collected huge store of parts to keep these cars running. But yeah, they started even in the mid 70s. A couple of my golf cars were used in vintage racing as early as I think 76, 77. And then forward from there, sporadically they were used in vintage racing, and now today we still occasionally get to see them.
I was going to say, to his credit, you watched the Motorsports Reunion at Laguna during Car Week, and Bruce Canepa, I don't think realizes the value of his 917 because he will not let anybody pass him.
Yeah, I think Bruce knows the value.
Yeah. But he also knows how to handle it. So
Yeah, he knows the track, he knows the car,
How much fun
really
it can
well.
be, I'm sure.
Unfortunately, Laguna Seca is not really the right track for that car, but because it doesn't get to stretch its legs. But it's still really fun to see him.
yeah. Are all the 917s accounted for? Are
Pretty
there any?
much.
Okay.
Occasionally there will be a chassis that disappears for a while. Well, like chassis 22. Seinfeld's car.
Yeah.
We don't know where it is. We'll find out one of these days.
Yeah. I'm thinking it'll be pretty easy to spot if it shows up at, whatever Rennsport
Yeah.
or vintage race.
But the thing is, and here's the sad part, is the great plastic Porsches from that era, 908s, 917s, 910s, sometimes go to collections, and disappear because they go to collections that are super secretive, super wealthy people. And I've been told by, again, some of my insiders that there's certain cars that we will never see again.
Yeah.
And that makes me sad.
So like famous art, right? People just
it's like
it's traded and it's tucked away.
It's a painting that
and
could
someone's
go,
enjoying it.
yeah, it goes to a private collection and might never be seen in public.
How many 917 liveries are the Golf, the Salzburg red car? For the first time, I saw
there's
the green.
there's
The
a lot-
green.
there's a lot.
Probably more than
The
you think.
green-
Yeah.
Yeah.
But remember,
Hippie car.
the chassis didn't hold his livery his whole life. They would change
they would
sometimes
swap it
per
out.
race. Yeah.
Ah.
Oh, yeah.
There's a lot, right? I mean,
Oh, there are many, many
Yeah.
different liveries and variations on the livery. Salzburg did a couple different variations on theirs. Martini had multiple variations on
They
theirs.
make it more confusing is the bodywork.
Yeah.
So some of them became
Short
short-tailed
tail,
and
long
long-tail, and some became spiders. It was,
Yeah.
It was just a tool back then, right? It was a chassis with an engine.
That's the thing
that
about
they
it.
were
You have to
racing.
remember these racing cars. They were just tools, and when they weren't useful anymore, they were just set aside, parked out in back, at Visoc under tarps. That's how some of these cars were found and purchased. They were buried in the snow behind the workshop under tarp. Car that today might be worth $30 or $35 million. Literally, could, was
That's
parked.
why I told the archives, I'm like, so where's the trash that you throw away?
did you ever get to connect with engineers or technicians from back in the day that worked on these?
I talked to, in addition to John Horstman, who was the chief engineer for the golf team, I did get to talk with Alan Hearn, who was the head mechanic for Pedro Rodriguez's car.
Oh, wow.
Wow.
And so I was able to verify a few things with Alan. Unfortunately, Alan has also passed away now. But yeah, most of the other engineering, the hardcore engineering information is all from other books. And it's been really well documented for the most part in a bunch of other books.
So that's your Golf 917 book.
Yeah.
Let me just remind folks, be sure to head over to PCA.org to sign up for PCA's newsletters. We have performance news, e-brake news, Mart Fresh news, all free for you. All you have to do is head over there and sign up. Let's get into your more recent book. Started out in 1875 and carries people through 2023 in the Mission X, and that's Porsche Decades.
Yeah. Well, I'm really enthusiastic about this book because I wrote it for everybody at this table, everybody in PCA, the Porsche community. I just felt like we didn't have a good general history, compilation of the history of Porsche, going back literally to the beginning, 1875, of course, when Ferdinand Porsche was born. It's 150 years ago, so you guys will be on the cruise for the actual date,
50th anniversary.
for his 150th birthday. I hope you guys throw a big party on September 3rd. I felt like it was something we needed, and also I was thinking a little bit contrarian. Most of the Porsche books we have today are like my first book. They're very narrow in their focus and extremely deep in their detail and their depth. And I just thought, well, what if we went shallow and wide, something more introductory that's more accessible to people who are new to the community, new to the club, new to owning a Porsche. And so that's really how it started. I felt like if you understanding a little bit of the history, you'll enjoy the ownership experience of your car a little bit more. And I really feel you'll enjoy the club experience more if you know a little bit of the basic history, because of course we Porsche people talk our own language. And if you don't know the language, you might feel a little bit left out.
And that's exactly it. We have friends, we have family that are interested in the Porsche brand, but they often feel very intimidated to kind of take a full step forward into the PCA world because they feel like they don't know enough. And as I went through your book, I did find like this is the perfect intro for someone that wants to not go so deep, to know enough, and as you said, appreciate where the car that they're driving came from.
It doesn't matter what they're driving.
It doesn't matter what it is, but you understand and where it starts. And what I picked up for me was how much of a portion of it was in the electric world. And I know it's very controversial today, but back then, I think someone has said it before. I think the automotive landscape came to a fork in the road, and we could have already been in full electric, but maybe the people that were in the petroleum and gasoline side were a little bit stronger in their persuasion, and so internal combustion engines became the norm. But they too were very much in electric at the beginning.
Well, yeah, you're referring to Ferdinand Porsche's very first vehicles that he did as early as 1898 with Lohner. They were pure battery electric vehicles,
and then later a hybrid too, I think.
Yeah,
right?
he very quickly ran into all the problems that we are familiar with. The batteries are too heavy.
Story.
Range anxiety. Where do I charge it? So he ran into all those problems, and his solution, of course, was what we would call a hybrid, where you use a combustion engine to drive a generator to feed the electricity to his electric wheel hub motors. But Vu, your point is important. At the turn of the century, in the first decade of the 20th century, we had 3 propulsion systems in automobiles, and it wasn't clear who the winner was going to be. We had electric, we had steam,
that's right,
and we had combustion.
Yeah.
And
Steve.
shout out to Jay Leno, who I got to meet for the first time recently, and he's a steam enthusiast. But it wasn't clear who the winner was going to be, and each one of those 3 systems had its problems, right? And it wasn't clear who the winner was going to be. I think the electric start, which I think was 1912, Cadillac was the first combustion engine car with electric starter. I think that, in addition to whatever the petroleum companies might have influenced, I think that was a huge, advantage, because when you didn't have to hand crank your combustion engine car, I think that made a big difference.
Yeah, that makes everything about the drive easier. It gives you the motivation to say, I want to drive to the store down the street.
Yeah, you don't have
Do
to
I have
worry
to
about
hand crank it and break my arm?
Yeah, worry
or
about breaking your arm. And let's face it, in those days, how many females wanted to have a vehicle where they had a hand crank starting it? You know what I mean? So, but yeah, Porsche's history, doesn't touch on steam, but touches on and starts with electric. And, of course, then at the end of the story comes full circle with the Taycan and Formula E, which I think Ferdinand Porsche would have loved that.
The other thing that you notice very early in the book, and most of us appreciate it here around the table, is the involvement with motorsports.
Oh,
right.
yes.
I mean, that's the hallmark of our brand, and it's very early in the book.
In 1899, Ferdinand Porsche won a big competition in Berlin with one of his EVs. And literally every step of the way, competition is part of the story. And Ferry Porsche said of his father, he said, I never knew my father to design any vehicle without at least giving some thought to competition.
So we know there's a tie-in. We talked about earlier VW and Porsche. We know Manny talks about Herbie, and we all love Beetles and such.
Yeah.
For those that don't know, how did the importance of the Beetle and the development there kind of lead into what we know as Porsche today?
Well, it's multifaceted. I mean, I think that for me, the obvious thing is the mechanicals, because when Porsche in 1948 decided to design and build their own car, they were forced to use Volkswagen mechanicals, engine, transmission, suspension, all that stuff. They didn't really have a lot of choice, and they were very familiar with the Volkswagen mechanicals because they had designed pretty much all of that. So they were very familiar with it, and it made sense to have that as the basis for the sports car. But the form language, the styling was also part of it, because Erwin Komenda, who was the body engineer and the stylist, had worked on the Volkswagen. And I think the form language there starts to translate into the 356 as well. And that form language is still with us.
Carries on till today.
Absolutely.
Which I would like to tell people, look at this like your 356 and look at an American car of that year.
Oh my
And
gosh!
wow,
Yeah.
what a difference! And a lot of it was just because of the fact that Germany was poor. Obviously, they lost the war, so they were not a rich country, and so they had to drive little engine cars.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, you compare a 356 and 50,
versus a
51.
59 Cadillac.
Oh, it's like
Yeah.
amazing.
Yeah.
That's how the differences are.
But the thing with Ferry Porsche, one of his philosophies was functional design will be timeless. So he didn't want to do style for the sake of style. And of course, as a person of Italian heritage, I love Italian exotics and Italian sports cars, and nobody does style like the Italians. But Ferry Porsche and the Germans had just a little different way of looking at it. They wanted functional design. And Ferry Porsche was, even when the 911 first debuted, and it got kind of lukewarm reception from the press and from people, Ferry Porsche was actually happy about that, because he's like, okay, we're not doing style for the sake of style, and this won't become outdated, 2 years from now. It'll be timeless, and it'll have a long. Of course, he had no idea how long the runway was going to be for that car, but. That was their thing.
Yeah, I mean, Porsches, we all know, have a very signature look to it, and its look has evolved. You look at other manufacturers that their styling changes.
Starts new.
Like a new
generation
every couple of years. And
I think Bangle for BMW is like one of those
Yeah.
moments where, for me, things change.
Right.
They don't always change for the better.
Yeah, and that may work for their business, but for Porsche has held. There's basically only 5 men have been the keepers of the flame. The head of design and styling for Porsche. There's really only 5 men in 75 plus years that have had that job.
Oh.
So that's another thing that has kind of helped to keep that consistency of design and style language.
Yeah. Can you talk a little bit about, world events and how Porsche has been able to sort of maintain their course in their designs and building their cars?
I'm not quite sure what you mean by
Well,
world event.
Manny just talked about how Porsche, out of necessity, had to, be more efficient, to have a very simplistic car, but still be high performing. There's a time when Porsche, let's say, or today,
The recession going into the
recessions,
90s.
or the 80s, when the Porsche was actually almost out of business and it had to redevelop themselves, but still maintain their signature look.
Yeah. Well, I think that period of time, late 80s into the early 90s, exchange rate was a huge thing. In the mid 80s, when the dollar was weak and the mark was strong, am I getting that right? Other way around. Other way around. Dollar was strong, mark was weak.
Right.
Porsche could sell tons, thousands and thousands of 944s. At a really competitive price, right? My uncle had one in 86. But then when the exchange rate went the other way, the mark was strong, the dollar was weak, all of a sudden Porsches were incredibly expensive.
And we run into a recession, which makes things worse.
Yeah,
and
it makes it harder. You go back and look at some 964s and look at their sticker price, adjust for inflation. They were some of them were really, really expensive cars. No wonder it was hard to sell them. But of course, Porsche then was also handicapped by having 3 product lines with not sharing anything in common parts-wise, or almost nothing in common. And they became inefficient in their production. So I touch on it briefly in Decades, where, they sort of went hat in hand to the Japanese to try to say, hey, we need to learn how to do manufacturing and supply chain better. And to Porsche's credit, Dr. Wiedeking, put new systems and processes in place, allowed the 993 to be a, pretty reasonably priced 911 and also really popular and good performing car as well. So
$5,000 cheaper than the 964 MSRP
that it replaced. Yeah.
Let's think about that. If today they came out with the new 992.3 and it was $5,000 cheaper.
That doesn't happen. That doesn't happen.
Yeah. That just means the 964 is better than the 993.
We're not going to have that, are we?
We don't have three.
In my
Comments
opinion,
to Damon Lowney at PCA.org.
But I think in Jay's book, what I see overlying, which I love to teach people, is that Porsche has always been and continues to be an engineering company.
Yes.
Yeah.
Simply because they're switching from gas to electricity is really in their nature, because they are at the heart an engineering company. And like much of Jay's point about the story about the 911 when it came out, they were looking at the engineering behind the car and making it last and saying, all right, 56 has had its time. Now we have to keep on evolving. And throughout, and I tell people 48 is when they registered the first road car. But before then, they had the whole engineering firm from Porsche that was doing a little ton of work.
Yeah.
They had 200 and some, almost 300 employees just doing engineering work for other car companies.
Yeah, I don't know the percentage, but Porsche Design as a consulting company for the longest time was, a very significant part of the Porsche business.
Absolutely. And on the engineering piece, and back to your point about competition, they've always recognized that how fast you learn, how fast an engineer learns on the racing side compared to on the production car side. Because on the production car side, you have these long, even Porsche has fairly long development cycle. And so if you're an engineer, you don't learn at the same rate. Whereas if you're going weekend to weekend, you're on racing, you're learning fast about, you're learning your craft and you're learning your engineering skills. You have to.
And the consequences of the changes that you're making, right?
Yeah. If it blows up, right away, you went down the wrong path.
Yeah,
So
you don't have to wait till the next model year to change that toe setting on the street car that you got wrong. You can just do it there on the track, right?
If the crankshaft breaks or the input shaft breaks, it's not, we made it too light or too narrow or whatever. I mean, you learn this right away.
I always thought it was cool that, and I remember I asked Timo this, and he didn't really know the answer because he was surprised, but that every Porsche CEO, I believe, has had an engineering degree. Has been an engineer. It's almost like they did that on purpose, that in order to get to the top rung, you have to be an engineer, which to me speaks volumes because they're not looking for a marketing person.
Right.
They want someone who understands their company and puts engineering first. And Ferdinand Peak was the ultimate to me in engineering and understanding and being able to go in the race shop and tell them this is exactly what I want to do and this is how I think we should do it.
Yeah. And it goes back to what we were talking about earlier, is the core of what Porsche is and what Porsche is to PCA is because they stay true to that engineering focus, and the product that they're pumping out today is very much similar in vein with what they've done all along.
Yeah. And I tried to touch on it in Decades. I tried to touch on it briefly for virtually every model. A little bit about what were they trying to do from an engineering point of view. So, the 993 is a good example of, it's really a fascinating story when you look at the development of the 993 and where it was coming from and how they got to it. And even at the very simple introductory level that I'm presenting it, I think that kind of thing is really interesting. Going from, say, 996 to 997. Again, I present it very briefly, but it's huge, the changes that they were doing. I mean, they didn't think that just making the wheels a little bigger would mean they had to redesign the entire car, but that's almost what happened.
Yeah, you're right.
Going from 996 to 997, and there's I think that helps whether you own the 997 or you might want to know what's the car that came before and then what comes after and how does it all relate.
And why yours is the best. It's in the book.
Yeah, right.
Exactly. You can interpret my
987 came. One of the other great things about how Porsche has approached engineering over the years, and, this goes all the way back to the 356, and I guess you could call, maybe a changeover in the water-cooled era, flat six water-cooled era. But the parts availability, if you have an older car, you can probably put the better part from a newer car on the older car, and vice versa. If I want a GT3 front anti-roll bar from a 997, I can put it on my Cayman, which I did. So keeping that design similar and using what worked but making it better. That's one of the things I love about Porsche.
I think Ferry Porsche was something different from his father. Ferdinand Porsche was one to take leaps into new technologies and new ideas, more so than his son. Ferry Porsche, I think, my impression is he was much more incremental in his approach. And I think it's that incremental, gradual improvement, year to year, sometimes even within a model year, that speaks to what you're saying is there's some interchangeability that comes out of that. Yeah.
Going through the decades, do you have a favorite?
Oh, gosh. I mean, I'm a little bit biased to the 70s, having grown up in the 70s. It's a really colorful kind of era. but they're all fascinating. I had to do a lot more learning, say, for the 50s, because I've never been a huge 356 guy. Not that I don't have anything against them. I just never was that interested in the 356. So I had to do a lot of learning to write about the 1950s, because those cars I just didn't know very much about. So I had to spend a lot of time, and of course, agonizing over what to leave out. That was the other problem with this book.
Oh yeah, that's what I was going to ask you is that book could easily be 3 times the size that it is.
But then no one would. I can't.
It'd be too
That's
much.
called excellence is expected.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, that's
too much. Yeah.
Mr. Ludwigson's work.
Yeah.
But Vu, I would say to you, imagine you're a new Porsche Club member, and I hand you, 8,000 pages of Mr. Ludwigson's work,
Yeah.
and I say, read this. There'll be a quiz.
Back to the word intimidating. That's too intimidating
We
for a new
can't
person.
do that, but I think a new member, and I hope a new PCA member, could take this on and even gradually, chapter by chapter or section by section, and kind of get it. That's what I'm hoping for.
Absolutely. Any details or surprising as you put that all together that you can share with those that haven't
I
looked
think
at it?
one of the biggest surprises to me is in the early history of Porsche, pre-World War II and even pre-World War I, how there were certain events that if they had gone another way, we wouldn't be here. We wouldn't be having this conversation.
Yeah.
There'd be no such thing as Porsche.
All right.
Ferdinand Porsche himself was almost killed twice in airship accidents.
Oh, really?
When he was at Austro-Daimler, one of the things he developed at Austro-Daimler was aircraft engines to power both lighter than air and heavier than air aircraft. Almost killed twice in airship accidents. And then,
So you're saying airship and not airplane.
yeah, airship. So lighter than air. So, balloons that had combustion engines to power them. And then in 1932, roughly, there's this thing that I call the Russia Project, where the short version is Ferdinand Porsche was invited to become basically the chief engineer of the Soviet Union.
Oh,
I did not know that.
I did not know that.
Yeah, I didn't know about it either
Did
until
he have a choice?
Well, yeah, yes, he had a
Yeah.
choice. Very much so had a choice, and thankfully, his choice was to stay in Germany, and he had his reasons he had several really well thought out reasons for why he did not accept the job
Yeah.
in the Soviet Union. But just imagine if that had
Gone
gone
that way.
another way.
I'm imagining Lada's
I was
being
just thinking-
amazing,
We'd be
amazing cars.
We would be in the Lada Club.
Yeah, we had the Lada Club of America.
But then it was 45, was it, when the Allies were getting close to Berlin and they were bombing Stuttgart, and they told the Porsche family to move out, and they wanted to move them to Czechoslovakia, and that's where Ferry says, let me go look myself, and he finds
Yeah.
Gamoon, because that's near Zellamzee, where the family home is, and says, I found a better place, because you imagine if they would have went to Czechoslovakia, and then
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, he felt Austria would be a safe,
Safer,
and of
yeah.
course they're Austrian by heritage,
Yeah.
and they're familiar with that area anyway. But he felt it would be safer.
I think about that. I'm like, much to your point, how history would have changed, or if he had decided to help the French
Yeah.
when he was imprisoned. Which, after looking at some of the French cars, no offense to French cars, I can
The
understand what he needed.
Dutchebo Club.
They needed some help.
They all take a Clio 197 any day.
It's just fascinating and just deep history. So I'm hoping that people who do read the book will get interested and then want to go further and study more of the history that's out there from our other great authors,
agree.
like Mr. Ludwigson and the others who have done the in-depth stuff. And I'm hoping this will be sort of like the gateway.
No, I think you found the perfect niche, because I get that call a lot. People say, is there one book?
Yeah.
And I always tell them there's not one book that covers every single thing, because even Carl Ludwigson's book there's still areas you wish there was more information about. I say,
Sometimes.
but if you want one book now, I can recommend. I can say, here, read this, and this will give you this. You will win most any tech quiz your region does.
Oh, yeah, maybe.
Yeah.
But remember, Mr. Ludwigson's written many different books that cover things from different angles. So Excellence Was Expected really only covers from 1948 going forward. He has a couple other books that cover the early history that are totally separate from
That's my favorite.
Excellence.
That's like the New Testament quoting it before, like the Old Testament.
Yeah. It's worth mentioning that excellence was expected. That's if you want accurate, correct information in the whole story, like everything.
Yeah.
What magazines were saying around the world about these cars and the company, excellence was expected. Is it's like you can't call it a book. It's a collection of books now. Right?
Yeah, it's 4 volumes.
So,
The,
4
the
volumes,
final
yeah.
version is 4 volumes. And you do have to remember that Mr. Ludwigson has changed. So if you're looking at like the original one from the 70s, there's inaccurate information in there. So he's changed and updated as he's gone along because new information is always, we're always finding out new things.
Yep.
And he's done a great job of incorporating new information as it's gone along. And that'll probably continue. We'll have to see.
Do you remember that year we had the tech quiz at Parade, and we were at the banquet, and we gave the tech quiz to our friend Dieter Langenberger at the time, who was the, I think, head of archives for Porsche. And he took the test, and so we graded it, and what we marked wrong one of the answers, and he looked at it, he said, "No, that's correct." And we said, "No, it's incorrect." He goes, No, that is, I put the correct answer. So Ron Gordon, who did the tech quiz, brings the book that turns out Dieter wrote and says, "It's in your book here." And Dieter looks at it, he goes, "Oh, we found new information." He goes, that book's inaccurate now, much to Jay's point. He goes, the updated book has it corrected.
Oh my!
So that question was tossed out.
And it was about the loaner. That's what. So that's how far back in history that they found updated information. They had to change some things.
Yeah,
It's constantly. It's almost like a living thing that constantly evolves as more information comes out.
And with the 917, we get in trouble because it's such a legendary car that a lot of mythology has grown up around it, some of which is inaccurate or incorrect. And Mr. Ludwigson dispelled some of that in the last version of Excellence Was Expected because of new information that came out. Like Ferdinand Piëch wrote a book late in life. Unfortunately, the book is only in German, and so it's hard for us to read, but Mr. Ludwigson can read it and incorporate it into his work.
Well, congratulations on both books. For our listeners, can they still pick these up?
Golf 917 is very nearly sold out, so we don't have very many copies left, but Decades hopefully will be around for decades. We have plenty of copies, and I'll be happy to update it and reprint it as long as there's demand for it.
And can we talk about how we've tapped you for your volunteerism for Porsche Parade?
Oh, yes. Well, I'm working with the history team on some items for the parade, some of which I think I'm sworn to secrecy on. As far as the
Let's
details,
pump up for information.
as far as the details of what we're actually going to be doing, but one thing that I'm really looking forward to is offering some historically oriented presentations for people who might want to stay inside at a certain point in the air conditioning.
Yeah.
And so we're working on the details of that as far as the presentations that we're going to be offering, not on the Wednesday, of course, because we want to leave Wednesday available for all the tech stuff, all the great tech tactics stuff. But I think we're looking at Tuesday, Thursday as days to make a couple fun presentations available each day if it all works out. And one of the ones I'm hoping to do my basic Porsche history class that I do in my region, and hopefully that'll be fun.
Very cool. So let's remind everyone that Porsche Parade, Oklahoma City, July 6th through 12th. Phase 1 is currently open right now. Make sure, I think, will we have the Melanie one? Would that be before this one?
That's it. We already recorded that.
Okay.
Released it.
So we look forward to seeing you there. Treffin at Sea, our 70th anniversary cruise, August 30th through September 6th. And we'll not only celebrate PCA's 70th, but then there's a special birthday on September 3rd.
Absolutely.
Which I know because it's also my son's birthday, September 3rd. So,
You're a member.
for those of you who are looking to race against PCA members, maybe not actively out on a track, but you can do so digitally, check out PCASimRacing.com. On our YouTube channel, we've also have been covering some club racing footage right now, or here in as the day
time
of
of recording.
Yeah. At the time of recording, we'll be covering the club race at VIR, and recently we covered the club race at Sebring.
Sebring.
Sebring. So check those out. Lots of cool coverage there. If you're looking for PCA Insider swag, head over to PCAwebstore.org. We have bottles, we have mugs, we have t-shirts, and if you'd like a PCA Insider decal, all you need to do is send us your address information to podcast@pca.org. So we're at the top of the hour. Anything else before we close this episode out?
No, I would just say, I know the Golf 917 book's almost out, but if you can get it or get someone, one has one, pre-owned one, I guess. It is a magnificent book that has a beautiful slip cover on it. It's, both books are hardback, which I love. But the picture on the 917, that book alone is just, it's quite stunning.
Yeah, both books easily could fit in on top of your coffee table in the living room as you walk through the front door.
Well, thanks for saying that, but I really want people to read them and not just have them on the coffee table.
Yeah, and for me, it's an easy read, and the photos and the layout. Definitely look into it if you're looking to be a bit more knowledgeable about Porsche. So, folks,
You got to do books on tape, so it's something to listen to.
maybe
You know, a couple of people have suggested that.
You've got,
yeah,
you've got a voice for radio.
You definitely have a voice for that.
Well, thank you for saying that. A lot of people have said that. And music's my other hobby, so I am a singer. And
songwriter.
There you go.
yes, I'm a singer and songwriter. You can hear my stuff on Spotify and YouTube. But
Oh, nice. All right, that's your homework,
There you
everybody.
yeah, so you never know. A book on tape might be something we'd look at.
There you go. Well, everyone, thank you for listening. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Consider sharing our show with fellow Porsche enthusiasts. Until next time, stay safe, and we'll catch you down the road.